Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Anna Marquise, Civic Engagement Coordinator, and welcome to Shape Wyoming, hosted by us, the Equality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to improve the lives of all Wyoming's people through transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. Shape Wyoming is ESPC's grassroots lobbyist training designed to help people across Wyoming engage with our government and learn how to be effective citizen advocates. Traditionally, SHAPE is held in Cheyenne, but obviously things look a little different this year. So we'll be gathering here on Zoom every Monday from 5 to 6 p.m. until March 15th. Just some quick housekeeping. We're in meeting mode today. This means that all of the attendees are automatically muted, but we can also still see each other. We ask that you remain muted until we split off into breakout rooms. Please use the chat feature for any questions or comments that you may have. I'll hand things over shortly to Kristen and Tisa. They'll introduce themselves and leads tonight's session, and I'll be here to help with tech issues or any other problems as they come up. Again, just use the chat to let us know if you have any questions. Take it away, Kristen and Tisa.
Great, thank you so much. Hi everybody, my name is Kristen Gunther. I'm the program director at the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and I also serve as the vice chair of ESPC's board. I have given talks on the subject at SHAPE trainings in the past, so some of what I have to say might be a little bit familiar if you've come to this event in the past, but I'm really excited to be here tonight. My background is a mixture between science. I have a PhD in the program in ecology from the University of Wyoming, and also creative, I have an MFA in creative writing, also from UW. And so those two things play really nicely together in terms of this topic. So you're gonna have to bear with me because I'm gonna talk a little bit about science and also about story. So really glad to see everybody's faces, and looking forward to a good conversation.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Tisa Djahangiri. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager at the Jackson Hole Conservation Alliance. And I'm super excited to be here with you all tonight. What an awesome crowd. My background is, where to start? Well, I teach the Conservation Leadership Institute at the Alliance, and our focus is advocacy and leadership training with a big focus on public narrative. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic tonight. And my formal background is actually in physical geography and geology and geographic information systems. So also a little bit of science, but I quickly learned that we need the people power and advocacy as well as the science. So here we are. I'm really excited to be with you all tonight and see some familiar faces.
Absolutely. And yeah, just a little bit, this is a spoiler for a later slide, but I'm actually going to pick on scientists a little bit later on in my part of the talk. And the reason we're in meeting mode is that we both think that it's important not just to learn about what makes a good story, but to practice doing it. So we're going to make sure that we take a good chunk of time this evening to break out into small groups, give you guys some independent time to work on crafting a story, and then visit with each other to kind of try out how it works in practice. Although I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know some of you are very familiar with lobbying with story. So with that, I'm going to start the screen share. I've got some slides, and we're going to get going. So let me move this real quick. Sorry, this always takes a second to troubleshoot. All right, hopefully everybody can see that all right. If you can't, toss something in the chat. So our topic for tonight is the power of public narrative, which is a fancy way of saying how to tell your story in a way that makes a difference for the issues that you care about. So those of you who've seen me give a version of this talk before have seen me use this quote. So I apologize if this is old news for you, but I always love to start conversations about storytelling with this very famous quote by Joan Didion from a really great essay. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. That's a line a lot of us have heard before. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of the multiple choices. We live entirely by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images. Now, I love this because first of all, I think it's a beautiful quote. I think it's a great way to think about stories and the real power and importance they have in our lives, not just as entertainment, but as ways that we make meaning and think about how to navigate our lives. Stories have been a central part of cultures for as long as humanity has existed, basically. So it speaks to that and the kind of enduring and eternal value of stories. But, and this is where I told you I was going to bring in the science piece, it also speaks to some really true things about the human brain. So one of the reasons that storytelling is really important in advocacy is because it's a really complex world out there for all of us, obviously, in this conversation, but also for our decision makers. If you think about, if you've ever been exposed to the Wyoming legislature, you know that there are just hundreds of bills that legislators are looking at every session. So they are not only trying to deal with hundreds of bills, but they're also taking in lots and lots of information at any given moment about any of these bills. And so it's really complex. There's a whole lot of different bits of information, facts that your people are taking in at any given moment. And a good story can help cut through that. And if you think about how this works in your own brain, if you just take a second to think about where you're sitting right now, just kind of contemplate all the different kinds of inputs that you are getting that you're not even necessarily conscious of. Like where I'm sitting right now, if I actually start paying attention, I can feel the air temperature, there's the color of the wall, I'm spatially aware of the things around me. I'm kind of aware in my head of like the calendar of things going on in my house and at my job this week. There's like a lot going on and a lot of different inputs coming into my brain. But I don't have time as a conscious person to sort through all of those inputs. It just wouldn't be efficient for me to be aware of those things all the time. So your brain likes ways of creating shortcuts to try to get to meaning, compress information, be able to fill in gaps and kind of ease the processing load of taking in all of that information. So your brain needs ways to shortcut, make meaning, and remember and recall important information, so that it can speed up that decision-making process, speed up your kind of ability to form meaning and understanding of the world around you. And actually, that's kind of where bias comes from. There's all kinds of different cognitive biases that we have that are essentially our brain's way of shortcutting and trying to get to meaning faster. And again, if you've heard me talk about this before, you've heard me say it before, there's a bias that I love to talk about because it's a really great example of this called the rhyme as reason bias. And essentially what it means is that if if something rhymes, you're more likely to believe it's true. If anybody's familiar with the O.J. Simpson's narrative, the Johnny Cochran bit about if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. That's a really famous example of how that bias works. And it's because if something rhymes, it's easy to recall. It's easy to remember, and your brain is kind of wired to trust things that's easier to remember. So think of stories as a shortcut for your brain. What you're really trying to do is create a narrative, and knowing that there's this complex landscape, both of sensory input at any given moment, and in the context of like lobbying, you're also thinking about the fact that there's a lot of competing things going on for, say, a legislator's attention. You want to create a shortcut that helps your audience really understand the landscape and reach the same conclusion, guide them through the information to reach the same conclusion that you've reached. Now, this is where I pick on scientists because historically, if we look at what hasn't worked about science communication, one of the things that doesn't work sometimes with science communication is that scientists sometimes look at communication issues as, well, the way that I get to the outcome that I want is that I have all this information and the people that I need to convince don't have that information. They just don't know. We have a different perspective because they don't have the information that I do. So I got to fill that information deficit. I just have to give them more information and then we'll be on the same page. They'll get it. We'll see the world the same way. And any of you who've paid attention to the ongoing debate about things that are well established in the scientific literature, for example, whether or not climate change is happening, understands that that's not actually a historically useful way for scientists to communicate. Because actually, the way that people receive information, it's not really about the facts. Our values and our emotions, and really importantly, our personal experiences actually are the most important pieces of how we process reality. So you bring your personal experience and your feelings about things when you get even like neutrally delivered information, which is really important to remember. So what does that mean when we're talking about how to tell a good story? and why it's important to talk about values and emotions and common understanding and common experiences. It's not just because it's like a good thing to do and it makes us feel good. It helps your audience receive information the same way. It helps them connect with the information you're giving them. Leading with facts, front loading with lots and lots of facts and statistics, which some of us like to do. I know I fall into that trap all the time. That doesn't usually convince people. We aren't logic machines. The way our brains work is that it's actually our emotions and our beliefs and our experiences and our values that drive how we process reality. Another really important thing about communicating, especially in the context of storytelling and lobbying, is that it's a multi-step process. Sometimes we think of a communication as like something that comes to us like whole, right? Like I write this message and I deliver it and that's it. But really, when you're communicating with an audience, you're going through a multi-step process of both sending a message and then receiving feedback about how that message was actually, received by your audience. So what this means, so you're creating the message, right? You've got all this intention, you're trying to create a message, a story that really resonates with your audience. You can intend it to be received a certain way, but maybe the way your audience decodes that message, receives that message is really different from what you were trying to communicate. And then you can tell from their feedback to the story whether or not they're on the same page. A really good example of this in the context of lobbying is if you listen to people testify and talk about the same issue at different times during the legislative session, you can hear testimony change a little bit. I do this all the time. I try to adjust to what I'm hearing from legislators about what is or isn't working for them. If you get action alerts, you might notice that sometimes talking points change. Or fact sheets change, and sometimes that might be because the bill changed, but often it's because there was some feedback that, hey, the message that you're giving isn't necessarily landing the way that it needs to, so here's a better way to do it. So what's one of the really important things to remember about good storytelling is that it's an iterative process. It's not a one and done. You don't sit down and write it, write out your personal narrative, write out a testimony, give it once and say that is perfect. Never have to mess with that again. You're always, when I think about how I tell my personal story, I've gone through so many versions of it so many different times and used bits and pieces of it in testimonies and presentations. So it's a kind of a never-ending process, and you just have to be willing to hear feedback and adjust depending on what your audience, how your audience receives it. So that's kind of a really quick crash course in some of the science and history and context of why it is that story is so important and why it's really important for kind of framing how we receive information. Again, you can have great facts, but if you lead with a whole list of facts and you don't ever put it in context and try to evoke those experiences, shared values, emotions, etc., it's not likely that just the facts are going to change people's minds, because it's the rest of that actually lays the groundwork for how people receive those facts, that information, statistics, whatever it is. So to tell a good story, we have to start with values. So I'm going to turn it over to Tisa, who's going to start talking a little bit about values and set us up for an activity that you guys are going to do.
All right, thanks, Kristen. And you can just leave it on this slide for a second. And we'll just dive right into the values exercise. So in learning to tell a powerful advocacy story, the goal is to motivate others to act. And that motivation comes from shared values and inspiration that you can find with each other. So we have a worksheet to share. And Anna, were you going to drop that in the chat? Was that the plan? Okay, great. So Anna's going to share a worksheet with you, and there's a list of values here. And we'd love for you to just take a look at it and we'll just spend a minute or two with everyone looking at this list and think of which values stick out to you. If you had to pick 3 top values, which ones are they? And think about why that resonates with you. Where does it come from? What experiences in your life have made you value these things? So go ahead and click on this, and it should take you to this list of values, and we'll just take the next 2 minutes or so looking through it. And then I'd love for you to drop in the chat whenever you have a couple to share. So whichever ones really resonate and stick out to you.
I'm not finding them. How do I get to the list?
So it should be in the chat. And if
Oh,
you
in the
are
chat?
looking at,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll drop a file too now.
I'm not finding it in the chat. My link is showing, yeah, someone else it's blocked. Thank you. I'll turn off my.
Awesome.
Okay, we have another type here. Hopefully this one will work. Is it working for other folks? Okay, I see some nods and thumbs up. Okay, great. So go ahead and drop in the chat whenever you see a couple that resonate. Nice 2 thumbs up, Claire. Thanks for that. All right, we have integrity, understanding, teamwork. Thanks, Fran. Compassion, integrity, respect, grace, accountability. Oh, wow, compassion, responsibility, family, environment, fairness. Keep them coming. Justice and truth. Kindness, dignity, financial security, understanding, compassion, recognition, dignity, balance, understanding, community, ethics, stewardship, collaboration, connection. See a lot of dignity on here. Beauty, trust, vulnerability, autonomy. This is great. So think about this as you're looking through this list. It's important to know where your own values lie and starting to build your advocacy story. Because like we said, the key to motivation is understanding that values inspire action through emotion. So the emotions that you feel when you hear a story come from these values. And so these things that you're listing in the chat might be where those things are coming from. And let's see, Kristen, you can click to the next slide. Okay, so now we're going to shift into talking to about public narrative. Oh, and actually, wait, do you have the slides that I added, the one with the action inhibitors? Does that show up or not? If not, I can share mine. That might be easier.
Why don't you share yours?
Okay. Okay, 1 second. Keep thinking about your values. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, 1 second. Alrighty. So emotions inform us of what we value in ourselves and others and in the world. And it is through emotion that we can move others to act. Powerful stories mobilize feelings that encourage action and challenging feelings that inhibit action. So if you look at this chart, on the left, we have action inhibitors and on the right, action motivators. So these things on the right overcome these things on the left that might keep us from acting. So inertia causes us to ignore signs of the need for action. Fear can paralyze, driving us to rationalize inaction or drive us to apathy. Amplified by self-doubt and isolation, we may become victims of despair. On the other hand, urgency gets our attention, hope inspires us, and in concert with confidence and solidarity can move us to action. And then I wanted to clarify an acronym at the bottom right. YCMAD is you can make a difference. So that can overcome self-doubt, just feeling like your voice matters, which you hear a lot from us in groups like WALK as well, that your voice really does matter because It does, it makes a difference. So this is the public narrative structure. It's quite intuitive and it just has 3 components. So the first is the story of self. You start with your personal story, what experience brought you to this issue. This should evoke values through emotion. And then the second part is a story of us. So this connects your personal story back to the collective. It communicates a shared goal, vision, and values of your community. And you can even talk about a time where your community was successful overcoming something as an example. And then finally, the story of now is the urgency, where that comes in. Why is it imperative that you collectively act now? So those are the 3 parts. And in a story, these are the elements. So you have a plot, characters, and a moral of the story. Something happens, then something else happens. Think of a 5-year-old telling you about their day. It's sequential and well, sometimes maybe sequential, and starts with just a retelling of events. You then have choice points. So a situation where a challenge is presented and a character or community must make a decision in response. So a good story has a conflict or some type of tension or challenge point there. And then we want to see a nightmare and a dream. So painting these 2 different scenarios in contrast can be really powerful. So what happens if you don't act? What happens if you do take action? What's at stake here? This is really important to paint for people. And then stories are evocative. So include details, sensory things, and that will help just provide some more of that emotion piece that we're talking about. The other part about stories is that they're neither true or false, so they either work or they don't. Back to what Kristen was saying, it's not necessarily an argument that you can win with facts. You're just trying to evoke emotion and drive someone to act. So powerful stories mobilize feelings that encourage action. I'll say it again and again. And this is just a helpful visual about what makes a story. So what turns recounting an event or just a series of events into a story is the plot. So you have a challenge, you have a character, a challenge, a choice, and an outcome, and that turns it into a plot. And then I would say not always, but a lot of times you have a moral or some type of guiding idea there to accompany your story. So a plot begins with an unexpected challenge that confronts a character with an urgent need to pay attention, to make a choice for which he or she is not prepared for. And that choice yields an outcome, and then the outcome teaches a moral. Okay, so I have an example to share. And as Kristen said, it's an iterative process, and this example has not been iterated. So I wrote this today, and you all are the guinea pigs, so to speak, to hear my example. And I would love for you to think critically as I'm telling this story. What parts of the story resonates with you? What doesn't, and why? What does it make you feel? Does it not? Does it work? Does it inspire you to act? Why or why not? And then, yeah, given what you've learned tonight, after I go through this, think about how you would improve it. So let's see, I'm gonna stop sharing this screen for a second and take a sip of water. Okay. So I grew up on a farm in North Texas where my Iranian father and Girl Scout American mother shared the importance of connecting to nature with me. After college, I moved north and west seeking connection to the outdoors, recreation, and community, and found that here in Jackson. In the 6 years that I have lived in Wyoming, I've experienced an array of autoimmune-related health issues. Although Jackson has a hospital and some great doctors, it has been a struggle getting the specialized healthcare that I need, necessitating trips to Salt Lake City, lots of sick days, and prioritizing spending time in nature to combat stress-induced immune responses. So last year, when the pandemic hit Wyoming, I was thrust into a new landscape of health-related stress. Was I at a higher risk because of my autoimmune issues? Would I lose my job and health insurance? After the shelter-in-place orders lifted and my partner and I took down the blanket fort we built in our room, we started dreaming up ways we could connect with friends safely outside, doing what we love, which is simply romping around in nature. We needed a break from the stress. I had always been curious about the Red Desert, so off we went. We barely made it down the wild 4x4 road to Honeycomb Buttes before dark, which was a humbling experience with only part of a bumper lost in the process. Embarking into such a remote area quickly evoked a mindset shift. We felt small, free, nervous, connected, and curious all at once. We felt lucky to be able to travel to such an incredible landscape full of life, from pronghorn to bobcat tracks and elk antlers, to wild horses and ancient turtle fossils. This place is special. We spent 2 cold, windy nights under the bright stars and one day exploring the intricate and colorful maze that is Honeycomb Buttes. By tuning into this place, we connected to the natural processes and systems older and bigger than us at such a magnificent scale that it turned the volume down on the pandemic and the societal problems at large. By the end of the weekend, I felt healthier than I had in months. While this story is powerful to me, in my experience, it's not unique. Every Wyomingite's world has been turned upside down in one way or another this past year. We are experiencing a collective trauma that is highlighting inequities, testing the bandwidth of all our systems, and requiring people to isolate and disconnect from the most fundamental antidote to the human condition, which is community. While the word unprecedented has become so overused that it is now the norm, we do have a precedent for relieving the stress caused by the pandemic. Humans have known that it is healing to spend time outside with others for time immemorial. We are as hardwired to connect with nature as we are to seek community, and public lands are where these 2 important tenets of being human can come together. Public lands are the great equalizer. While I must mention that the history of these lands are often fraught with controversy and harm to Indigenous people, today these lands are public, meaning they are for everyone. Out there, the social hierarchies fade away. Out there, we all have to dig cat holes when there is no composting toilet, drink around 3 liters of water a day, and be prepared to deal with the harsh Wyoming elements. Protecting public lands like the Red Desert and managing them for multiple uses allows us to have a space to connect, combat isolation, and heal. According to the citizens of the Red Desert, Wyoming's northern Red Desert is a vast unfenced area of public lands made up of wild areas, buttes, desert mountains, colorful badlands, sand dunes, and other important lands connecting vital wildlife habitat for Western Wyoming. The area is also home to important Indigenous cultural sites, historic trails like the Oregon Trail and Pony Express route, the world's longest mule deer migration, a rare desert elk herd, and the largest concentration of greater sage grouse in the West. So as you can tell, this place is at once a wild and historic treasure and a complex puzzle of multiple uses. While public lands are heavily managed, they are not guaranteed to stay protected forever. Management of this special and complex place requires a balance between all of the stakeholders' needs, including you. So if left unchecked, we could see the need for resource extraction out-prioritize the need for preserving migration corridors and cultural sites. We could see the resource be loved to death by recreationists, as we are all too familiar with in other places in our state. To combat this, we need to build a network of advocates who are so connected to and in love with the Red Desert that they will speak up to protect it when things get out of balance. So take the time to learn about this special place. Take a visit with some friends and connect to the land. Not only is it good for your health, but it's good for the land too. It's a symbiotic relationship between us and the land. We need it to ground us, and it needs us to care for and protect it. To become part of this dream team of advocates, join the Citizens for the Red Desert. They will keep you connected to this place, even when you're isolated in your home. And I'm going to share a link in the chat so you can sign up to join. And it'd be awesome if you join Citizens of the Red Desert. Thank you. So
Hey,
that's my
Tisa.
unpracticed example.
Tisa, first of all, I love this. Thank you, Era. So before we jump into the activity, could I make one observation that I think is great about how you laid your story out? So one thing that the kind of one thing we haven't talked about yet is building up to kind of the point of a story, right? Or the advocacy ask, the final thing, which Tisa just did when she asked you to join Citizens for the Red Desert and shared that link. So one of the helpful ways that sometimes I like to think about telling a good advocacy story, and Tisa, you can think about the story of self and us and then the urgency added at the end. Think about that working like a funnel, right? So you start wide and you talk about your emotions, you try to evoke some of those shared experiences. You start by painting like a broad kind of welcoming picture, trying to invite people into your story with these personal details that evoke emotion, maybe some shared experiences, shared values. And then you funnel down into a specific context, right? So Tisa started with her personal experience and then funneled down into starting to talk about the Red Desert, the Wyoming landscape, this particular kind of public lands context. So it gets a little bit narrower. So we start wide, sort of personal details, painting this broad, really inviting picture, and then narrowing down a little bit. Then by the end of the story, you could see her narrow down even further to the end of that funnel, right? So now it's no longer just about public lands and some of the broader issues that she was talking about, the importance of public lands and the outdoors for protecting health. It brings you to a specific point about, which is why we need to make sure we maintain balance in this particular place. There's a group of people coming together to work towards that goal. So again, you start broad, inviting, welcome people into your story, use yourself as that entry point so that it's accessible, tapping into emotions and values, funnel into the context, and then you come to the point. And that point is that narrow, what's the urgency? What do we need to do right now? And ideally it's a call to action, which Tisa did at the end when she shared that link. And as a huge fan of the Red Desert and someone who lives adjacent to it, I really enjoyed hearing that story. So I just wanted to illustrate that because I thought that you did it really beautifully in that, the way you just did it.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm going to go ahead and share the slides again and just pull up this visual for what Kristen was talking about, which we had it up, but I guess we didn't actually talk about. So this here, this kind of upside down triangle illustrates that point. Great. So hopefully you were thinking critically as I was going through about if that story worked for you, what it made you feel. Does it inspire you to act? Was that inspiring enough for you to be like, yeah, I want to protect the Red Desert? Or if it didn't, why not? And what would help you resonate with that? I think we are a little early, which is great on our timeline. We're going to give you all a chance to practice this. And before that, I just want to boil it down a little bit. So remember that you are working to evoke shared emotions, experiences, and values. Your audience is more likely to connect with you and your message if they feel they have these things in common with you. So keeping it simple, trying to avoid jargon and acronyms as much as possible, and making it memorable are just some tips for you to work off of. And I like this, Kristen, you might need to explain, but I like this bumper sticker here. Are you an environmentalist or do you work for a living?
Yeah, let me I have two good examples of this. Hold on, I'm gonna get this off my whiteboard. Sorry to be awkwardly on camera reaching. Yeah, so jargon and acronyms always good to avoid. The make it memorable thing. So, stories can be long or short. And when you're communicating, think about the story that you're telling. Who are you telling? What are you saying about your community, about who you are, about who your audience is? And this is a really good example of a story. And maybe it's one that you identify with, and maybe it's one you don't identify with. But this came out of the timber wars in the Pacific Northwest around the spotted owl. And so if you think about what was going on there in terms of like timber communities, pushing back against the Endangered Species Act and, looking at sort of environmentalists as a threat to local way of life and economy and jobs, like this is telling a very clear story, right? It's a pretty compelling story. So this was a bumper sticker that was going around some of the timber towns. And it tells a very clear story of identity. Who is us? Who is them? What is at stake? And so, we talk about a much longer format story in this context, thinking about like what it's like to give a testimony, for example, but stories come in all different formats. And actually another example of this, the reason I grabbed it from my whiteboard, I brought this last year too. This is a sticker from the Wyoming Mining Association. It says coal, guns, and freedom. And it's not telling a full story, right? It doesn't have plot points, but that is telling a story about who we are as Wyoming. Okay, if you like freedom and you like guns, two things we pull really, really well in the state of Wyoming, coal goes right in there, right? So that's an identity marker too. So it's always sometimes fun to look at those kind of slogans, bumper stickers, short captures, and think about what story is that telling? Because that can sometimes give you insight on how to engage in conversation.
Awesome. I was just responding to something in the chat. So another point here is that a story doesn't have to be long or elaborate. And I had a great question from Era. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but about what context to use this format in, whether like a letter or testimony. And I think my version was pretty long, but if you can use this format in a testimony, can be really powerful. And I know Kristen's really seasoned at that, and it's a powerful tool for testimony. So I think ultimately a great way to ask a legislator to vote a certain way. So
One thing I want to add, you can actually even think of this as a 3-sentence formula for writing an email. Like you can do this in 3 sentences if you really want to. First sentence, who am I? Give enough background and context to kind of evoke those shared values, right? What community do I come from? What is the thing that we have in common, or the emotion or value that is driving me to act today? Context, talking about the community, what the community values are, what's going on in the community, and then boiling it down to the point. What is the urgency? What do I need you to do? I need you to vote no on this bill or yes on this bill, or whatever it is. So you can actually do it. I mean, if you think about it, you can break it down to, 3 sentences, and it works. So it works in a lot of different ways.
Sweet. So are we ready for breakout rooms? I actually can't see anyone's faces, but I'll take the silence as a yes from Kristen and Anna.
I see some nods of encouragement. So I think
Awesome.
Anna is going to break everybody into groups.
Great.
Sweet.
And just a little context for what we're doing. So during this time, think about your story. So the self, us, and now in this format we've been talking about. And like Kristen said, you can keep it really short. And then we won't have time probably for every person to share in their groups, but maybe once you've written something down, after a couple of minutes, if anyone is feeling brave and wants to share and maybe even get some feedback on part of their story, that'd be great. So we'll just let you all practice and write some things down, and then we'll join back in like 15 minutes.
Yep.
Awesome.
See you in a bit.